Hello, everyone. What a beautiful day to be here. Nice to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome to Jay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It is great to see you. I am so glad to see you, and I am so glad to see Brian F. too. Nice of you to make it too, man. Good to see you, brother. Hey, I'm going to ask you guys to do something for me. Somebody else has just come on, and I want you to say hello to everybody. What you're going to do is you are going to tell everybody that Mr. O has to go get a couple things, just like you should as well. In fact, I'm going to write it on the history right now so that you guys can see it, so that everybody can make sure that they go get it. Yeah. Ooh, stars. Okay. So I am pressing return in just a second. Are you ready? I'm going to tell you, you have to go get it. It is a scavenger hunt. You need something, anything that you can do, whatever it is that I'm going to ask you to. Hey, Mag. Hello. How are you? Okay, here it is. It is the team who's got the steam. What you have to do is when you come back and you have the items, then in the in the chat line, you're going to say back. Deal? On your marks, get set, go. I'm coming! Who's here? Everybody here? Everybody here? Dang! Dang! Ah! Okay, so Jay Patel says he's back, what, 4 times? What does that mean? You went and got it, went and got it, went and got it? I bet Mag probably had all of hers. Jensen, did you read the side? Because it's really important that you do that. And if you're watching it from someplace else later, you need to be reading it to find these items, right? So, hey, boy, I'm a little bit out of breath right now. I have got my speaker. I've got the book. I have this. I have this. Oh, yeah, and I have this. Hello, everybody. My name is John O'Keefe. I am currently a teacher. Yes, I'm not kidding. Currently a teacher at Gwynn Oaks Elementary in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Woo woo, the Broncos. And what I'm going to share with you is that I am here to read. I am here to participate with the audience. If you use the chat line on the side, I am here to help people get more comfortable with English, making sure that we understand our context clues and stuff like that. We are also working with a whole bunch of people who are just coming to hear a great story. Maybe a story that they had never read before. Maybe a story they had read before. Maybe a story that they always meant to read, but then they got too old. Those kinds of things. So if you got the things that I asked you to go get, good job. Okay. Why did I ask you to go get it? I'm sure some of my kids in the classroom have a pretty good idea of why I asked you to go get a piece of paper, right? I asked you to go get a piece of paper because if you record your experience in the world, then you have it at a later date to look back onto. And so today I am going to teach you a little bit about what it means to have a notebook. Now, it is okay if all you found as a piece of paper is a sticky note stack. If I went into my recycle bin and I found a piece of paper like this, yes, it's got a blank side. I could do that. I could totally do that. My main girl, and what I do ask is that you start thinking about asking for a notebook. The cool thing about a notebook is that you can hold on to it for a really long time. You don't believe me? Check this out. I have a box filled with notebooks. I'm not kidding. Look at all those notebooks. This is my current one right here. This is my school kind of work one, but this one is my right now book. But I will show you years of notebooks. These are all mine. These are all my journals. From since I was about 12, I've been having a journal. Some people call it a diary. Some people call it a workbook. Some people call it a sketchbook. Whatever it is that you are, then get it. If you have one, then you put your name in it and you own it and it becomes yours. It becomes something that is a breathing personification, a speaker from the past of your life into the present. And so you can always look back at it. I actually today was with a group of kids and I was doing a poetry slam, representing poetry slam. And the poetry slam, as Jay and Michelle were present and accounted for, and yeah, for the most part, we had some visits from Joshua as well. But the fact is that I went back and grabbed a few of those notebooks that I had poetry in to share because Michelle was coming up with her own stuff and Jay was coming up with the theme of family. So anyway, why do I have a notebook? The reason why I have a notebook is that I can open that book up and I can turn to pages, and on that page, I can put the date. You should do this on your page too. That's what I'm doing here. You put the date because then you know when you did this. And today's date is 5/19/20, 5/19/20. Mag, I know that you're from Brazil. The day before the month. So most of the kids around here get to learn that stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to also say is that where are you right now? Are you at home? Are you at the Grand Canyon? Are you in your special reading spot? In your room? Are you sitting outside on a comfy chair? What are you on to be comfortable on? So I want you to just, like for me, I'm just going to write home. And then I'm going to say at YouTube Live because this is cool. If you're new, I don't just read. I try to help you figure out how to read better. I stunk as a reader. I hated reading. I didn't like it. I was bored most of the time, and people laughed at jokes that I didn't understand. And I didn't tell anybody that I was not good at reading. Until, as anybody in my classroom will tell you, Josh Kahn, very good friend of mine, best friend, like 4th, 5th, 6th grade, he busted me and he said, "You don't know how to read very well, do you?" And I went, "What?" And he's like, I know, you've been getting big books that you can't read and acting like you've been reading, but you're not reading. And I went, "Yeah, you're right." So one of the things that I have to tell you, as you are one of the folks who is kind enough to come here and participate with us, is that you take the time to learn how to read better, not just how to read. That's easy. Those are the mechanics pieces. And I know when I say that's easy, some of you are like, "Oh, that's not easy for me." But the reality is that I want to make sure that you are the best you can be in regards to this stuff. So what we're going to do for the first 5 minutes or so right now is I'm going to give you the title of the book, and you are going to make a page that is the title. What I want you to do is I'm going to show you the book. I'm super excited because I love this book a lot. And so This is a book that you will see is from Elizabeth George Spear. Elizabeth George Spear. This is the publishing company, and there is a very large bear. A very large bear. And that bear has its claws out. Look at that thing. That is just, right? So then you have these two boys down here. And what do you see about those two boys? Look a little bit closer. What do you see? What do you notice? You notice anything similar or different in them? So this is what we call inferencing. So obviously, before I even open this book up, I have an idea of its main characters, a potentially significant moment in the story, as well as some beautiful background and setting so I can see the forest. Maybe you're making some ideas of what you know about these two guys. Do you notice something different about what they're wearing? Do you notice any other differences? What do they have in their hands? Different. Clothes? A little bit different. So, welcome to The Sign of the Beaver, as read by John O'Keefe, but written by Elizabeth George Spear. I'm going to tell you a little bit of background on this. Does this look like it's happening today, like right now, at some point in the world? Some of you are probably like this. Yeah, maybe it could be. The other thing that I want to also point out is this. This is probably in the past. Probably in the past. So we have to start paying attention to that. It looks like a historic fiction book or a historic novel. Sometimes I can just kind of get yourself warmed up to the actual action of the reading. So have I ever read anything by the author yet? No. Do I know anything about The Sign of the Beaver? By the way, did you get that? That's the title, The Sign of the Beaver. So on this page, while I babble for the next 5 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on so that kids who tell me on a daily basis that I need to work on my time management, then I'm going to make sure that we get that. So I'm going to start the clock for 5 minutes, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of background on this story, okay? So start working. What you're going to do is you're going to kind of artistically make the words, The Sign of the Beaver. I'm going to show it to you one more time so you can see it. Capital THESIGNOFTHEBEAVER. Spell it right. Makes sense, right? Spell it right. Gosh, those claws of that bear. Crazy. Okay, so my timer started. You got 5 minutes to design the page. Okay, everything that you know, anything that you might think about, words that go around you, stuff like that, that's all really good stuff. So what I want to tell you a little bit about while you are designing your page, because I'm designing my page as well. So I'm going to do my best to spell things right, and I am going to try to give you a little bit of background before that alarm stops, okay? So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to a story called The Sign of the Beaver. The reason why I chose this book is because it has an amazing amount of adventure in it. It is going to be a lesson. I also really like history. So by getting this book, I get to go back to some of my favorite times, which is the time when the Europeans, when they came to this country, had a group of colonies. And they spent some time being a part of the country called Britain. Some of you might know it. And so this is the time called the colonial times. And this is the time that some of you probably have heard of the Pilgrims. You've probably heard about, oh, darn, I messed up. Oh, shucks. Oh, no. Okay, so anyway, I'm sorry. Excuse me, my brain got into my art, and so I got distracted. You see how easy it is? So, of the Beaver, Sign of the Beaver. Okay, so we are in the colonial times. We are going to be going back to a time when more land had people who were originally here in America, who had lived on these lands for a very, very, very long time. The Native Americans, Indians, some people call them. And so these Native Americans lived all over the land, and they called specific places home because they would know the animals, they would know the trees, they would know the fish, they would know how to grow the fruits in the wildernesses, which plants were not good to eat. And so they would spend a lot of time. They knew this land so well, but then all of a sudden these new people arrived. They had different colored skin, and they brought with them something that they did not mean to bring with them. It's not their fault. It's just because they lived on a different land. And it's actually pretty interesting because it's kind of like this COVID thing. It was an illness that snuck in through like getting a cold, like getting the flu off. And they also didn't have hospitals and doctors and those things. And so many were killed through the process of meeting the white people or the people of European descent. So the Native Americans began to have to learn how to share the land, but the land was being taken away from them because people thought that they didn't know very much, or they didn't look like they were as modernized as the European was. They didn't know as much about science. But what will happen is that as groups of Europeans began to move into different locations, they started coming in contact, and they became further and further away from the white or European background people, and started moving into the forest, and they would be able to try to start land. And so now we are into a place where we have about 50 seconds left. This is what I've gotten so far. Sign of the Beaver. Now, if I get bored and I'm not really quite sure what I want to do, I can start designing it. I can start putting things around these words. This just gives me the beginning of it. So I turn the page. I turn the page so that I have fresh pages. And the cool thing about having a whole book is that you don't have to get a new page, a new piece of paper. If you only have one piece of paper, turn it over and use the back. If you don't have two sides of the paper, then draw around Sign of the Beaver. We're going to be reading chapters 1 through 4. And now I am going to say chapter 1 on the top of my piece. Now, I'm not going to be able to draw pictures while I read. That's your job. That's your job to participate. Okay? So, alarms on. I promised you only 5 minutes. I shut my mouth and I say to you, welcome to the book by Elizabeth George Spear, The Sign of the Beaver. Welcome. We're going to go back in time. You're going to have to listen to the clues. Remember, you're being introduced to new characters. You're being introduced to a new place. You're being introduced to a new problem. And so you want to pay attention to things that might help you understand that. Sometimes, like Mag did when we were doing the Tale of Despero, she did such a nice job of writing down all the characters' names as they showed up and what their relationship was. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, The Sign of the Beaver, chapter 1. Matt. First word, Matt. Capital M-A-T-T. Matt stood at the edge of the clearing for some time after his father had gone out of sight among the trees. There was just a chance that his father might turn back, that perhaps he had forgotten something or had some last word of advice. This was one time Matt reckoned he wouldn't mind the advice, no matter how many times he had heard it already before. But finally, he had to admit that this was not going to happen. His father had really gone. He was alone, with miles of wilderness stretching on every side. Welcome to the introduction of this book. What do you already know? Who's our main character? Who did he watch leave the clearing? What did he hope that person was going to do? I got a little bit of pause. He turned and looked back at the log house. It was a fair house, he thought. His mother would have no cause to be ashamed of it. He had helped to build every inch of this house. He had helped cut down the spruce trees and haul the logs and square and notch them. He had stood at one end of ends together as snugly, though, as they had grown that way. Simile. He had climbed the roof to fasten down the cedar splints with long poles and dragged up pine boughs to cover them. Behind the cabin were the mounds of corn he had helped to plant, the green blades already shooting up, and the pumpkin vines just showing between the stumps of trees. Stumps of trees. Between stumps of trees. That means they cut those trees down. They are in the middle of the wilderness, clearing a place for a farm. They built their cabin out of those trees. And now he has corn and pumpkin growing in a very small garden. If only it weren't so quiet. He had been alone before. His father had often gone into the forest to hunt for hours on end. Even when he was there, he was not much of a talker. Sometimes they had worked side by side, though a whole morning without his speaking a single word. But this silence was different. It coiled around Matt and reached into his stomach to settle there in a hard knot. Wow. The silence reached in and grabbed a hold of his stomach in a hard knot. Yeah, that's amazing. That's personification. He knew it was high time his father was starting back. This was part of the plan that the family had worked out together in the long winter of 1768. Boom. 1768. If you know about history then, you know this is before the Revolutionary War, which started in 1760. No, it had just started. 1765 was I think the Boston Massacre. So you're right in that road to the revolution. So they were planning this back in the long winter beforehand. Whoop! This is going to go flashback. Sitting by lamplight around the pine table back in Massachusetts. Now I know where they are. They're in the northeast part of the United States, above New York, above Connecticut, above Vermont and New Hampshire and Maine. Oh, is there something else hiding up there? Oh, that's northern New York, of course. Okay, so we're up in that part of the United States. He knew it was high time for his father starting back. I'm going to just start this over because I've interrupted too much. I won't interrupt as much anymore, I promise. He knew it was high time his father was starting back. This was part of the plan that the family had worked out together in the long winter of 1768, sitting by lamplight around the pine table back in Massachusetts. His father had spread out the surveyor's map and traced the boundaries of the land that he had purchased in Maine territory. They would be the first settlers in a new township. In the spring, when the ice melted, Matt and his father would travel north. They would take passage on a ship to the settlement at the mouth of the Penobscot River. Penobscot. It's got a capital letter on it. Penobscot River. Okay, so now I know I'm in Maine territory, 1768, at a place called the Penobscot River. There, they would find some man with a boat to take them up the river further and then up a smaller river that branched off from it, many days' distance from the settlement. Finally, they would strike out on foot to the forest and claim their own plot of land. Whew. They would clear a patch of ground, build a cabin, and plant some corn. That's what they said in the first part, right? So he had done that. They had built the cabin, planted the corn, and gotten ready to go. In the summer, his father would go back to Massachusetts to fetch his mother and sister and the new baby. While Matt and his father were gone, Matt would stay behind and guard the cabin and the corn patch. Now I get it. Okay, so he's up there because this was the deal. And his dad was going to go back and get who? Mom, sister, and a new baby. But the baby isn't born yet. Baby is going to come while these guys are growing stuff that summer. Cool? So we're talking long winter into March, April, May, June, July, and then late summer, he's going to go and get that. Okay. So, okay, I won't stop. I'll stop talking so much. Sorry. Okay. It hadn't been quite so easy as it had sounded back in the house in Quincy, Massachusetts. Matt had had to get used to going to sleep at night with every muscle in his body aching. But the log house was finished. It had only one room. Before winter, they would add a loft for him and his sister to sleep in. Inside, there were shelves along one wall and a sturdy puncheon table with 2 stools. One of these days, his father promised, he would cut out a window and fasten oiled paper to let in the light. There's no window in this cabin yet. He said that maybe next spring they'll do that. But right now, it's just a room without any windows. And if they cut it out, they don't have glass. It says that they're going to put oiled paper to let the light in. That's weird. I thought glass was available everywhere. Someday, the paper would be replaced with real glass. See how my brain gets answered right there? Against the wall was a chimney of smaller logs, daubed and lined with clay from the creek. This too was a temporary structure. Over and over, his father had warned Matt that this wasn't as safe as a stone chimney, and that he had to watch out for flying sparks. He needn't fear. After all the work of building this house, Matt wasn't going to let it burn down over his ears. Pay attention to that. 6 weeks, his father had said that morning. Maybe 7. Hard to reckon exactly. With your ma and sister, we'll have slow going, especially with the new little one. You may lose tracks of weeks while you're out here alone, he added. Easy thing to do when you're alone. Might be well to make notches on a stick. 7 notches to a stick. When you get to the seventh stick, you can start looking for us. A silly thing to do, Matt thought, as though he couldn't count the weeks for himself. But he wouldn't argue about it, not on the last morning. Then his father reached up to a chink in the log wall and took down the battered tin box that held his watch and his compass and a few silver coins. He took out the big silver watch. Every time you cut a notch, he said, remember to wind this up at the same time. Guys, I got to make sure that you understand this. Back in the day, watches did not run on batteries. Watches, old ones, have springs. My friend Phil knows a lot about watches. He is like a champion watch master. He's like a hobbyist. He collects them. But back then, you had to wind your clock up to tighten it. Otherwise, when it would unravel, it would just stop working, and then you didn't know what time it was. So his dad is holding out this silver watch. And he says, every time you finish putting a notch in that stick to count the day, you wind this so that you don't lose what time it is. You mean, oh wait, it belonged to your grandpa. Would have belonged to you anyhow, any sooner or later. Might as well be now. You mean it's mine? Aye, it's yours. Be kind of company hearing that thing tick. The lump in Matt's throat felt as big as the watch. This was the finest thing his father had ever possessed. I'll take care of it, he managed finally. Aye, I know Jory left. His father had given him a second gift. Thinking of it, Matt walked back into the cabin and looked up at his father's rifle, hanging on 2 pegs over the door. I'll take your old blunderbuss with me, his father had said. This one aims true. But mind you, don't go banging away at everything that moves. Wait till you're dead sure. There's plenty of powder if you don't waste it. It was the first sign he had given that he felt uneasy about leaving Matt here alone. Matt wished now that he could have said something to reassure his father, instead of standing there tongue-tied. That's an idiom. Tongue-tied? I can't tie my tongue in. Tongue-tied means you can't talk. Okay, sorry. And he just stood there, tongue-tied. Oh no, now I lost my spot. Reassure his father instead of standing there tongue-tied. But if he had the chance again, he knew he wouldn't do any better. They just weren't a family to put things into words. He reached up and took down the rifle. It was lighter than his old matchlock, the one his father had carried away with him in exchange. This was a fine piece, the walnut stock as smooth and shining as his mother's silk dress. It was a mite long, but it had a good balance. With this gun, he wouldn't need to waste powder, so it wouldn't hurt to take one shot right now, just to try the feel of it. You get it? His dad left him with a big rifle. And that's a pretty powerful thing. This kid must be pretty mature. His dad must know that he's doing all right. I wonder how old he is. He knew his father always kept that rifle as clean as new polished spoons. But because he enjoyed handling it, Matt poked about in the touch hole with the metal pick. From the powder horn, he shook a little bit of the black powder into the pan. Then he took one lead bullet out of the pouch, wrapped it in a patch of cloth, and rammed it into the barrel of the gun. As he worked, he whistled loud. His stomach loosened just a little bit. Do you remember the knot that he had gotten when he started realizing how alone he was? And now his whistling is making him feel better. As he stepped into the woods, a blue jay screeched a warning, so it was some time before he spotted anything to shoot at. Presently, he saw a red squirrel hunched on a branch, with its tail curled up behind its ears. He lifted the rifle and sighted along the barrel, minding his father's advice and waiting till he was dead sure. The clean feel of the shot delighted him. It didn't set him back on his heels like his old matchlock used to. Still, he hadn't quite gotten the knack of it. He caught the flick of a tail as the squirrel scampered to an upper branch. I could do better with my own gun, he thought. This rifle of his father's was going to take some getting used to. Ruefully, he trudged back to the cabin. Wow, that's great. Okay, so let's stop. This is a good word. Ruefully. R-U-E-F-U-L-L-Y. R-U-E-F-U-L-L-Y. I want to use this as an example of something. Ruefully is a pretty weird word, but listen to some clues. How does he feel right now? Feel pretty good because he killed that squirrel? Wrong. He didn't kill the squirrel. He missed the squirrel. He thought he was for sure going to hit it, and he didn't. And so he missed. And now he realizes he's going to have to learn how to shoot the gun. And so listen to how he walks. Ruefully, he trudged back to the cabin. For his noon meal, he sat munching a bit of Johnny cake his father had baked that morning. Already, he was beginning to realize that time was going to move slowly. A whole afternoon to go before he could cut the first notch. Wow, we learned a lot. Ruefully, what does it mean, do you think? How's he feeling right now? Did he kill food for dinner? So all he got to eat was a little bit of Johnny cake, which is nothing more than a little bit of flour and water. Something. Interesting. And he still hasn't been able to cut the first notch. 7 sticks. That would be August. He would have a birthday before August. He supposed his father had forgotten that, with so many things on his mind. By the time his family got here, he would be 13 years old. Now I got it. I told you I was wondering how old he was, and look at how the author handed it to me. So Matt, a 12-year-old kid, is hanging out in a cabin in the middle of northern Maine in their new place while his father goes back to get mom and the baby and the daughter, and then they're going to come back up to live there. But while they're gone, Matt has to stay with the cabin. What's he going to do? Why does he have to stay? Well, I guess there's probably some concern about maybe something being dangerous, somebody taking it over, somebody stealing your land. And I don't know how that works because I don't know much about that rule or the laws. But man, he's going to be 13 when they come back. But he's all alone right now. Chapter 2. By the next morning, the tight place in his stomach was gone. By the morning after that, Matt decided that it was mighty pleasant living alone. He enjoyed walking to a day stretched before him to fill as he pleased. He could set himself the necessary chores without having to listen to any advice about how they should be done. How could he have thought that time would move slowly? As the days passed and he cut one notch after another on his stick, Matt discovered that there was never time enough for all that must be done between sunrise and sunset. Whoa, so cool. So Matt is starting to love living at the cabin. He's got no adults telling him how to clean something. He doesn't have anybody telling him what he's got to do. So he's feeling pretty free, pretty manly, pretty grown up. And he's 12. It's only like a year older than some of you. Could you be out in the cabin was finished. His father had left him the endless task of chinking the spaces between the logs with clay from the creek bank. At the edge of the clearing, there were trees to fell to let in more sun on the growing corn. The underbrush that kept creeping closer over the cleared ground. All this provided plenty of wood to be chopped and stacked on the woodpile against the cabin wall. To cook a meal for himself once or twice a day, he had to keep a fire going. Twice in the first few days, he had waked and found his ashes cold. Back home in Quincy, if his mother's fire burned out, she had sent him or Sarah to go shovel or to borrow a live coal from a neighbor. There was no neighbor out here. He had to gather twigs and make a wad of shredded cedar bark, then strike his flint and blow on the tiny sparks until it burst into flame. A man could get mighty hungry before he had coaxed that spark into a cooking fire. It's not easy to start a fire out in the middle of the woods. We're going to have to try to teach you guys how to do that. The corn patch needed constant tending. In these hot, bright days, every drop of water that those green shoots demanded had to be lugged from the creek, a kettleful at a time. And there was no way to water the corn without encouraging the weeds as well. As fast as he pulled those weeds, new ones sprang up. The crows drove him distracted, forever flapping about. A dozen times a day, he would dash at them fiercely, shouting and waving his arms. They would just fly lazily off and wait on a nearby treetop till his back was turned. He dared not waste his precious powder on them. He wouldn't waste his powder on killing the crows. At night, wild creatures nibbled the tops of the green shoots. Once, he sat up all night with his rifle across his knee, batting at the mosquitoes. When morning came, he stumbled into a cabin and slept half the day away. That was the second time he let his fire go out. He seemed to be hungrier than before. In his life, the barrel of flour was going down almost as fast as when two were dipping into it. He depended on his gun to keep it. He set out confidently into the forest, venturing farther each day, certain of bringing home a duck or a rabbit for his dinner. For a change of diet, he would take his fish pole and follow the twisting course of the creek or watch the trail his father had blazed to a pond some distance away. In no time, he would catch all the fish he could eat. Twice he had glimpsed a deer moving through the trees just out of range of his rifle. One of these days, he promised himself, he would bring it down. It was a good life, with only a few small annoyances buzzing like mosquitoes inside his head. One of these was the thought of Indians. Not that he feared Indians. His father had been assured by the proprietors that the new settlement would be safe. Since the last treaty with the tribes, there had not been an attack reported anywhere in this part of Maine. Pause. Little history story. Many of you have already studied Native Americans. Some of you have not. One of the things that we need to understand before we move further is that not only did the Native Americans have to share their land, Native Americans in many ways were forced to give up their land. Americans, or the colonists, really wanted that land, and they wanted more of it so they could move more people onto the colony, and so that they could have more people. And by having more people, they needed more food, and by more food, they needed more farms, and they needed more land. And so they would do what were called treaties with Native American tribes. The treaty basically was a promise that the Native Americans would give up their land and would be given land in another area so that they could continue their lifestyle. But the problem was many times that was taking away major hunting lands. And so that was threatening many tribes. And so one of the things that he is worried about, there's a new treaty with them that agrees, that says that since that treaty was made with the Native Americans or Indians, that there haven't been any attacks since then. So that's what probably made Matt's dad want to move to this part. Still, no one could not entirely forget all those horrible tales. And he just didn't like the feeling that he had sometimes that someone was watching him. He couldn't prove it. He never saw anything more than a quick shadow that might be a moving branch, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that somebody was out there. One of those pieces of advice his father had been so fond of giving him had been about the Indians. "They won't bother you," he said. "Most of them have left for Canada. The ones who stayed don't want to make any trouble. But Indians take great stock in politeness. Should you meet one, speak to him just the same as to the minister back home." You hear that? Treat them with respect if you come in contact with them. Matt had seen his father follow his own advice. Once, when they had tramped a long way from the cabin, they had seen in the distance a solitary, dark-skinned figure. The two men had nodded to each other gravely and then lifted a hand in salute, exactly as if they had been two deacons passing in the town square. Interesting simile. So they basically saw each other in the middle of the woods and just kind of kept moving, but it was in the middle of the forest. But how could you be respectful to a shadow that would not show itself? It made Matt uneasy. He had grown used to the stillness of the cabin. In fact, he knew now that the forest is rarely quiet. As he tramped through it, he was accompanied by the chirruping of birds, the chatter of squirrels, and the whine and twang of thousands of bothersome insects. In the night, he could recognize now the strange sounds that used to startle him. The grunts of a porcupine rummaging in the garden, the boom of the great horned owl, or the long, quavering cry of the loon from the distant pond. The first time that he had heard that loon call, he thought it was a wolf. Now he liked to hear it. Mournful or sad as it was the cry of another living creature. Matt would worm his shoulder into a comfortable spot in the hemlock boughs that made his mattress, pull the blanket over his head to shut out the mosquitoes, and fall asleep well satisfied with his world. He would have liked, however, to have someone to talk to occasionally. He hadn't reckoned on missing that. For much of the day, he was content to be alone, tramping through the woods or sitting on the bank of the creek, dangling his fish line. He was like his father in that way, but there were times when he had thought he'd like to share these moments with someone, with anybody, even his sister, Sarah, though he'd never paid much mind to her. So he was not quite so quick-witted as he should have been when unexpectedly someone arrived. And that is where we will finish for today. The sign of the Beaver, ladies and gentlemen, Matt in the middle of the wilderness. Dad back to Massachusetts to pick up family. The silence is becoming more comfortable. But what will you do when somebody arrives that you were not expecting? Now, ladies and gentlemen, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take our work from today, right? You make your sign. You make your lead sign of the Beaver sign. And then you kind of turn it and you say chapter 1. And maybe you write down a word like ruefully. That's the word that I wrote down. Remember, ruefully, he swaggered back to his cabin. He was not a very happy person, was he? He was very sad and he was nervous. But now he's feeling more comfortable until somebody arrives. Bring this back. If you don't have one today, bring one tomorrow. It's easy. Take care of yourself. Take good care of others. And maybe life's not so bad. I love you. And get out of here.